Hello everyone, I am Heather. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you are passionate about travel like I am, please be sure to subscribe to my channel with the notification bell on so you don't miss any of my travel related videos. Okay, in today's video, I want to share with you the 6 reasons that I believe that virus testing should not be a requirement for travel. The current global health crisis that we are all fully aware of and that has been affecting everyone's lives in a major way for the past year has deeply affected the travel industry. It's caused great devastation among the travel industry. Businesses, cruise lines, airlines have already gone bankrupt and gone out of business. Travel overall across the world is way, way down, and there's no sign of things recovering anytime soon. Lots of attractions and restaurants remain closed. It's a big deal for the travel industry. For me personally, I actually had a job interview right before everything shut down in March of 2020 to work at a travel agency right here near my home. I was really excited about it. The interview went really well. And then a couple weeks later, I finally heard back from them and they had to tell me that they were so sorry, but obviously because of what was happening, they had to institute a hiring freeze. So that was the end of that for me. One of the changes that has happened in travel, kind of gradually, and it's been ramping up more and more, is increased testing for the virus for different forms of travel. And they're making this, increasingly, this is becoming required. As I talked about in my recent January travel news update, which I will link right up here for you, if you want to do any kind of international travel, which your options for that as an American are pretty limited right now. But if you are outside of the United States and you want to come into the United States, whether you're an American citizen or not, you're going to have to present a negative PCR test that was taken within 3 days of your travel return to the US. That's just one example. Another example is like for some cruises that are going in the Mediterranean, for example, you have to get tested at least twice, 3 times at the beginning and the end of your cruise. I have major problems with this. One thing that I didn't include in my list, because it's not really a reason why I oppose it, but something that I think is odd, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong. I cannot think of any other time in history where they have required people to be tested for an illness or a disease or a virus in order to be able to travel. I mean, certainly there's been times when people are excluded from travel because they have a sickness. You know, I can think of like tuberculosis maybe, or Ebola. I don't know, where it's a concern if they're traveling with the sickness. But I can't think of any time ever where they've been testing people for something, with a blood test or anything like that, ever. Have they ever done that? This is like new, and I think that's part of the reason that it bothers me. I feel like if this was actually an effective way to prevent the spread of an illness, it would have been done at some point in the past. And as far as I can remember, I don't think it ever has been. Because I'm so opposed to testing as a requirement for travel, and especially because of reason number 1, which I'll share with you in a second, basically anything that involves a requirement for testing is out for me and my family. And so not only is travel risky right now anyway because of the potential exposure to the virus, and not only is travel much more difficult because of all of the restrictions and limitations, which I talked about in this video, but if there's going to be a requirement for testing, we're just flat out not going to do it. And so until those testing requirements go away, our family pretty much is really limited in our travel options, even if it gets to a point where it's safe. So here we go. These are my 6 reasons for why I'm against testing as a requirement for travel. Number 1 is very personal to us, but I know from comments that in conversations I've seen in the comment sections of other people's videos, we are definitely not alone in feeling this way. The number 1 reason I'm opposed to it is we're scared of the test. We literally just do not want to endure that test. I personally don't want to do it, and I don't want to make my kids do it. And I know some people are like, it's no big deal. It's just a momentary discomfort, or it just made my eyes water or whatever. I don't care. We've had some really bad experiences with nasopharyngeal stuff. For example, if you've ever been conscious when you've had a nasogastral tube inserted in your nose, which was an extremely negative and a not successful thing that happened to me in a hospital one time, or if you've ever had one of those NG swabs before, my daughter had to be swabbed once for H1N1, which I think she actually did have, which was a previous pandemic. That was very traumatic for her. She still remembers it. I think she was only, how long ago was that? She was young, and she still remembers it. It was very traumatic for her. And if you're not aware, you see pictures and stuff. If you haven't seen actual video of what that test is actually like, it's not just like a Q-tip in the open main part of your nose. They have to go all the way up your nose and then down the back of your throat inside. And they have to do it, my understanding is in most cases, it has to be both nostrils, and they have to keep it in there for so many seconds. It's not fun. It's at best extremely uncomfortable, and in a lot of cases for people, it's very painful and quite traumatic. And for most of these testing requirements, you don't have to, it's not like, okay, I had my one test, I'm done. It's multiple tests you have to keep having over and over again. So I just really personally do not want to have to go through that. It really freaks me out, and it really freaks my kids out, and I don't want them to have to endure it either. So that's our number one main reason why we're opposed to testing personally, and why we won't do any kind of traveling that requires testing. Okay, my next 3 reasons for why I'm opposed to testing as a requirement for travel are all related to the unreliability of the testing. If you're not aware, these tests are not very reliable at all. Okay, the number 2 reason is all the false positives and false negatives. These have been all over the news if you follow the travel industry at all. It happens a lot. You either get a false positive or you get a false negative. And there's problems with both of these. If you have a false positive, you have to undergo another test to see if it really is positive or not. And you're going to endure possibly quarantine and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it turns out the test wasn't positive at all. An entire cruise got cut short and rerouted, and everybody had to go back, and the cruise got cut off in Asia because of a false positive. The guy didn't even have the virus. So it's a major problem. With false negatives, that's an even bigger problem for everyone. The false positive is a problem for the person who tests positive falsely. A false negative puts every single person around that person at risk because they actually do have the virus, but they think they don't because the test incorrectly told them they didn't. So false positives and negatives are a major reason I oppose testing. The number 3 reason is related to this. That test is only good right then. It only tells you if you're positive, or if it can detect that you're positive at that exact moment. There's 2 problems with this. Number 1, you might have been negative right then, but 15 minutes later, you might walk through a crowded airport and contract the virus. And now you're positive, but you think you're negative because you just had this test, okay? On the other end of things, you might already have the virus in your body at the time you take that test, and it says negative, but you actually have the virus because it takes a certain number of days for the virus to build up in your body before the test can detect it. This is the problem with asymptomatic carriers. They've determined that about 50% of the cases of COVID-19 are spread by people who have no symptoms at all. And it may be because they're never going to show symptoms, or it may be because it's just too soon and they're not showing symptoms yet. My mom had a friend who just tested positive for COVID-19, and she didn't have any symptoms. And it was only a few days later, after she'd already tested positive, that she started to get actually sick. So it can go, there's a lot of ways that it can go wrong with that. But the point is that that test is only good for that moment, and it still might not even know for sure if you're positive or not. My 4th reason for why I'm opposed to testing is it gives people a false sense of security. So like I just said, you get tested, it says you're negative, but either you're not really negative because it was too soon and the test couldn't detect the virus yet, or like I said, 15 minutes later, you walk through a crowd and you just contracted the virus. People think, oh, I tested negative, I'm fine. No, you're not fine. The virus is still everywhere. You can still contract it 2 minutes later. So the testing will make people think they're fine, I'm okay. I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to social distance. I can see my family. I can go to a party, all these things. I'm negative. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that, and it gives people a false sense of security. And I'm very, very concerned that this is causing lax behavior in the health protocols and all the other areas that people need to be doing. I have seen it with my own eyes everywhere I go over the last year. People are horrible at wearing their masks properly and distancing from other people. They're awful at it. Like, at least where I live, pretty much nobody's doing it right. I mean, me and my family, we're doing it right. And we basically just look around and shake our heads anytime we leave the house, at which time we don't get out of our car, because nobody else is doing it right. It's alarming at a massive scale. So that false sense of security that people are getting from tested, thinking they're negative and so everything's great, is a real problem. Okay, the number 5 reason I do not like testing as a requirement for travel, and this is a big one for us too, is it's causing people to have an added expense to their travels. Testing for the purposes of travel is going to cost you money. Testing in, like, if you're sick, in a lot of cases, I think that's actually free, or your health insurance will cover it. But testing for the purposes of travel, any kind of test you're going to need to get for the purposes of, I need this negative test so I can get on this airplane so I can fly to this place, or I need this negative test to get on this cruise ship or whatever, you're going to have to pay for that. Now, I think there is a couple of cruise lines that are including it, like in the fare or whatever, but for the most part, it's going to be an added travel expense for people. The price of the tests can vary widely, and sometimes they're really expensive. Like, we're talking $250, $300. Okay, think about this. If you're a family of 4 and you all have to get a negative test and it's $250 a piece, that's an extra $1,000 added to your travel costs. And for me, that's a lot. That could be 1/4 of my entire travel budget. And then think about if you have a false positive and you have to get tested a second time and you got to pay for that. Or if you end up having to quarantine because you tested positive and then you have to pay for another test before you can get out of quarantine. The amount of money that this could cost could rack up really fast. And not only that, but another potential expense related to the testing is if you test positive. Okay, let's say best case scenario. You test positive before you were going to go on your trip, like at home, at a clinic or a drive-up testing site or something. Even then, you're going to incur additional expenses, not just the expense of the test, but the expense of having to cancel the things you were going to do. Maybe you're going to lose out on deposits. Maybe you're going to lose out on money you already paid for something. Maybe you're going to have to cancel a flight and you can't get your money back, whatever. Or if you test positive while you're traveling, you're going to incur major expenses because you're going to be required to quarantine for probably 14 days in a hotel somewhere, and you're going to have to pay for that. Now, there's a few exceptions. Like in the Bahamas, they're requiring everyone who visits the Bahamas to purchase a special travel insurance that would cover that contingency. But for the most part, unless you have cancel for any reason travel insurance, which is very expensive in itself and really hard to get, you're going to be facing a massive amount of expense if you test positive while you're traveling. Okay, and then the 6th and final reason that I am opposed to traveling as a requirement for travel is it makes travel so much more complicated and difficult. And part of it is because of what I just said, because if you test positive, you're going to get stuck somewhere in a quarantine and, maybe you had to get back to work or, now your flights are all messed up and You've got to figure out someplace that's going to let you stay there in quarantine or all that. It also just complicates travel because you have to find a place to get tested before you can travel, or you have to find a place to get tested before you can get on your flight or whatever. Now, increasingly, hotels, resorts, airlines, airports, all those places are offering on-site testing. But for a lot of these, for a negative PCR test, this isn't a quick thing. It can take up to 3 days to get the results. And so that's a whole complication, and trying to get the timing of getting that testing done at the right frame of time before you're going to do certain parts of your travel is really complex. I just feel like it's adding a worry factor, a stress factor to your travel that's going to make it not fun at all, because you're going to be constantly worrying, what if we test positive? Now what are we going to do? Or where are we going to find a place to get tested, or all of this. It just makes travel so much more difficult and complicated and expensive. And in the end, I don't think it really helps because of the reasons I said, like reason 2, 3, 4 that I said. Because of the unreliability of the testing, I really don't think it makes that much of a difference. Yes, for some places like New Zealand, they've caught people coming into the country that tested positive, and they were able to make them quarantine or send them back or whatever. But in a lot of cases, you're not going to catch everyone. In many cases, the virus still sneaks its way through and the testing doesn't catch it. And so because of that, I feel like testing is completely ineffective for keeping the virus out of places, which is basically what the requirement for traveling is trying to do. You still don't know if there's people that are actually carrying the virus and just happen to test negative because of the timing of it or whatever, sitting next to you on the airplane, sitting next to you on the train, at the next table over in the restaurant. You don't know for sure. You have to basically go through life right now assuming that everyone around you is potentially carrying it. And if you're not living like that, you're putting yourself and your family and everyone around you at risk. And because of what I've observed in behavior, most people aren't living like that. And so the testing isn't going to fix it. It's not going to fix it. It's not going to catch it. And I don't know what the solution is, because trying to change the behavior of billions of people obviously isn't an easy or even possible task. But I don't think that testing is the solution. Like I said at the beginning, I don't know of any other time in history where they've tried to do something like this. So I don't know why they think this is the solution. I really think, unfortunately, that the solution is mass vaccinations and time. Because until we can get to the point where we have worldwide herd immunity and the likelihood of transmission is basically nil, travel is going to be inherently risky. I personally don't see that testing makes it any less so. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with me. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe if you want to stay up to date on all of my travel content. Thank you everyone for joining me today. Safe travels.